In full disclosure, and I must, with some confession, I have to admit that I am a name dropper. When I was a pastor of the First Baptist Church of Gloucester in Massachusetts, we were just down the block on the same side of the street as the first Universalist church in America, founded in 1774. Their pastor during the years, part of the years that I was there, was a fundamentalist and a member of the John Birch Society who picketed me at one time. And it was also during the time that the Unitarian Universalist Association denomination joined together, which was in 1961. And my Universalist colleague would not join that new denomination. I used to kid him that we were in the wrong churches. He would have made a good fundamentalist Baptist minister, and as a liberal progressive pastor, I would have been a good Unitarian Universalist. Well, needless to say, he did not appreciate my joking about that. I just wish he knew where I was standing right now. Many years later, when I retired from Morehouse School of Medicine in Atlanta, we moved to Northumberland. We decided we would only attend a progressive, liberal church publicly affirming of gay, lesbian, transgender persons, and that led us to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Susquehanna Valley, started by none other than Joseph Priestley, who was one of those who brought Unitarianism actually to America and to Northumberland. Can you imagine what that information did for my joy in name dropping? Whenever I'm with my longtime Unitarian Universalist friends, colleagues, students, or when we are at our place in California and attending the UU Church congregation of Santa Rosa, it takes no urging for me to let them know about my story of Gloucester and Northumberland and Joseph Priestley. Our minister, in fact, Chris Bell, often loves to do history lessons of Unitarian Universalists, and he always mentions often Joseph Priestley and our beginnings with Joseph Priestley. So back to Joe. Now, we're on first name basis now. In reading the biography of Joseph Priestley, I really found him to be quite a unique person for his day. He was born into a dissenting family. That is, they did not conform to the Church of England and instead embraced Calvinism, the forerunner of the Presbyterian Church. He was the oldest of 6 children, and because of their economic desire to survive, he was sent to live with his grandfather when he was only a year old, and he stayed with him for 5 years. And then Joseph returned to live with his father after his mother died. Then 2 years later, his father remarried, and Joseph was sent to live with an aunt and uncle. He was obviously very bright, because at the age of 4, he could recite all 107 questions and answers of the Presbyterian Westminster Shorter Catechism. Then at the age of 16, he became very seriously ill and almost died. And this illness left him emotionally distraught, questioning his Calvinistic theology of predestination. And instead, he embraced the idea of universal salvation, which he held throughout the rest of his life. While we know him as a chemist and discoverer of oxygen and soda water, he actually was a scholar and a teacher his entire life. He was known for his unorthodox beliefs, a total denial of the Trinity, although he still called himself a Christian. He was an English separatist. He was a theologian, serving several dissenting congregations throughout England, with negative as well as positive experiences. In fact, a Methodist group wrote a hymn with one of the verses in the hymn asking God to expel the Unitarian fiend and chase his doctrine back to hell. I don't think it's in our hymnal. Love those Methodists. His good friend, Theophilus Lindsey, founded a new Christian denomination, Unitarianism. And Joseph Priestley joined, supported, and defended Unitarianism the whole rest of his life. He loved studying languages, which included Greek, Hebrew, Latin, French, German, Italian, Aramaic, and Arabic. He was critical of the way many misuse the English grammar. And he wrote an entire book on proper English grammar, so he was a grammarian. He had more than 150 publications during his lifetime, from political philosophy to education to theology to natural philosophy. Not only did he help found Unitarianism in England, he brought it to America and to Northumberland, where he spent the final 10 years of his life. So, let us not, therefore, be discouraged. For the present, we should see no greater number of churches professedly Unitarian. Well, that was one further anecdote that I would like to mention. While living in England, Priestley wrote extensively about the corruption and distortions of Christianity. He continued to defend free inquiry and challenged his readers to enact change, leading to a national debate in England. He said, "Let us not, therefore, be discouraged, though for the present we should see no great number of churches professedly Unitarian. We are, as it were, laying gunpowder, grain by grain, under the old building of error and superstition, which a simple spark may hereafter inflame, so as to produce an instantaneous explosion, in consequence of which that edifice, the erection of which has been the work of ages, may be overturned in a moment. And so effectively as that the same foundation can never be built upon again," unquote. And it's this statement that forever branded him as Gunpowder Joe. After reading about his life, the transcript of his Gravesite service and tribute given by his friend William Christie on that cold Thursday afternoon, February 9th, 1804, made more sense to me. Mr. Christie later wrote, quote, "The severity of the cold hindered many ladies from attending the funeral, but there was plenty numerous concourse of respectable citizens." Well, I'd like to read some excerpts now from his tribute. He starts out, "Death. Death, though it is the common lot of inevitable destiny of all the human race, it has something in it that is extremely awful. But the love of life has been wisely implanted in the mind of man by the all-gracious Creator and arises from the very structure and constitution of the human frame. Though life abounds sometimes with calamities, trials, and distresses, yet few, very few, feel themselves so uneasy under the pressure of these disagreeable events as to not be willing to live a little longer. There is still a degree of good mixed with every evil. With respect to the eminent person to whose remains we meet here to pay our last duties, I have this to say, that the celebrity he acquired was the just reward of his genius and laborious exertions. He was not ushered into the world by the splendor of ancestry or of opulence. Under the guidance of the divine providence, with the advantages of a liberal education joined to great natural ability, he was the maker of his own fortune and crafter of his own fame. No man knew better than he did the value of time and the wisdom of embracing the present moment and improving it to its utmost. His life was a continued exercise of his rational faculties of those subjects that he deemed to be useful and important. His numerous publications on a great variety of subjects furnish an abundant proof of the truth of this assertion. In the decline of life, his feeble and infirm body was often unable to bear the pressure of his vigorous and active mind. Yet he still persevered and continued writing to the last. Though he might have distinguished himself in the national establishment of the Church of England and acquired lucrative preferment and ecclesiastical distinction, he preferred the humble life of a dissenting minister. Mr. Christie goes on to say, "In the early part of my life, I was much benefited by some of his practical writings, and particularly by the frequent perusal of one small treatise, which had an effect upon my mind that I cannot easily describe, and which in my judgment would be sufficient to rescue his memory from oblivion, though he had never written anything more. The place being, or that piece being, quote, a free address to Protestant dissenters as such, by a dissenter, 1774. But to speak more particularly to the merits of the late Dr. Priestley, I shall consider him briefly under three views: as a philosopher, as a divine, and as a member of society. With respect to the first, in consequence of many laborious and successful experiments, he has enlarged the boundaries of human knowledge, investigated the latest properties of natural substances, discovered many facts not only surprising and ingenious, but some of them capable of being applied to purposes of general utility. In this respect, he has been a benefactor to the world at large. As a divine, his knowledge of the exact and critical meaning of the sacred text of the Old and New Testament in the original languages was very considerable. And in the course of his studies, and in consequence of the controversies in which he had been engaged, he was led to make profound researches into ancient church history, the result of which has appeared in many different publications. And here it would be unpardonable to omit one remarkable instance in which Dr. Priestley has served and promoted the general cause of the Christian world. By the many mastery defenses he has published of revealed religion. Now, if they have not converted many deists, they have at least confirmed the doubtful and wavering and prevented them from lapsing into infidelity, as well as strengthening the hands and encouraged the hearts of those who were sincere in their attachment to Jewish and Christian traditions. I now leave the present subject with one remark. On the basis of divine revelation, I had the pleasure of agreeing with the late Dr. Priestley. In some other points, perhaps of no small importance, I differed from him. And it is possible there may be not just a few here present who may think they have good ground to differ from us both. Let every man be fully persuaded by his own mind. Let our inquiries on religious subjects be fairly and impartially conducted. Let us exercise much charity, candor, and Christian forbearance as we can, without giving up what we apprehend to be the truth. I now come to the third and last particular, namely, to consider Dr. Priestley as a member of society. And here every unprejudiced person that is in the least acquainted with his sentiments or writings must admit that his views were great and liberal, that he was a declared oppressor of oppression and tyranny, and a friend of the civil and religious rights of mankind. When by the implacable resentment of some violent zealots in the church and state, his own country of England became uneasy and rather dangerous to him, and he looked over for an asylum to hospitable and friendly shores of the United States. The people of America have enjoyed the advantages of his society for almost 10 years. The inhabitants here of Northumberland, his town, among whom the greatest part of his time has been spent, can best bear witness to his quiet, friendly, and unblameable deportment. They have known that every Lord's Day be performed divine service with seriousness and devotion, while his strength and ability to do so permitted him. He lived to a good old age of 70, and as I have been informed, preserved his sense and recollection to the last, and dies with resignation and acquiescence in the will of divine providence. Now, in reflecting on his own tribute, William Christie later wrote the following for publication. Quote, "From what was said in my tribute, the reader will discover that I was not present at the time of Dr. Priestley's death. I, however, saw him frequently in the last stages of his life. Some interesting conversation took place between us. In one conversation, the second or third day of the present year, when he was in a state of great bodily weakness, but still exerting his mental faculties. He looked out the window of his library and observed with admiration the falling snow. And he said, "Mr. Christie, what a fine world do we live in. I don't believe it will be burned, as many believe." I replied, "The natural world might do very well if the moral world were good." He answered, "It will grow better." The last conversation I had with Dr. Priestley was on Wednesday, the 1st of February, about 5 days before his death. I was struck with his appearance as he sat in his chair, and he looked hollow, discovered great weakness of body, but possessed a perfectly distinct and regular mind, with a clear and audible voice. I could not help but say, "Dr. Priestley, you have done with temporal things." He replied, looking over to me with a good-natured smile, "Well, nearly so, sir, but the doctor thinks my disorder has taken a different turn, and I may yet live some weeks to complete my publications." I returned, "I wish it may be so." And he said to me with pleasure and a cheerful countenance, "See in what peace a Christian can die." I took leave soon after, thinking it would be my last sight of him in this life, and it actually was. He grasped my hand and parting said, "God bless you." I returned, "The Lord be with you, Doctor." Now, frankly, I can hardly wait to tell the congregation at the UU in Santa Rosa that I delivered this Joseph Priestley sermon on Joseph Priestley Sunday in Northumberland, and near the Joseph Priestley House, Laboratory, and Chapel that I go to each month for poetry and music. And I know Dee Castile, and I know Tom Bresenham, and I know Joe Geis, and I know Hope Koff, who plays the 1815 John Wind organ. Now, is that name dropping or what?